Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are tackling a monster of a topic, World War II, the single most destructive conflict in all of human history. And to help us wrap our heads around it, we're taking our cues from the absolutely brilliant animation channel, Oversimplified. All right, let's dive in.
You know, to really get what kicked this whole thing off, you have to go back to the end of the last major war. Because in the rubble of World War I, a couple of guys in particular were just simmering with resentment. And their ambition? Well, it was about to set the entire world on fire.
So after World War I, both Italy and Germany were frankly on their knees. They felt totally cheated by how the war ended, their economies were an absolute mess, and their governments were just powerless. And when people are that desperate, it creates this power vacuum. A vacuum that was about to be filled by some very charismatic and ultimately very terrifying new leaders.
I mean, just look at the playbook here. It's almost identical. Over in Italy, you have Benito Mussolini, who promised to bring back the glory of the Roman Empire. And in Germany, you've got a furiously patriotic Adolf Hitler who swore he'd tear up that humiliating Treaty of Versailles and make Germany proud again. The end result was exactly the same. Two powerful dictatorships, each one built around the cult of a single man.
But hey, the storm wasn't just gathering over Europe. Nope, half a world away, another major power was on the rise. And the Empire of Japan, it had its own big and, let's be honest, pretty dangerous ideas.
So for centuries, Japan had been totally isolated. Then the US basically forced them to open up, and they modernized at this incredible breakneck speed. But here's the problem. As an island nation, Japan didn't have a lot of natural resources, and they felt like the big Western powers were constantly looking down on them. So what do? You turn to conquest. They launched a massive campaign of military expansion to grab territory and resources from all their neighbors.
Okay, so what's the bottom line here? By the 1930s, you've got these three powerful nations, Germany, Italy, and Japan, and they're all kind of on the same page. They're all fueled by this belief that they are racially superior, they all have a deep-seated hatred for the Allies, and they all share an insatiable appetite for military conquest.
So once Hitler has a firm grip on Germany, he starts just tearing up the Treaty of Versailles. He's openly rebuilding the army, starting an air force, and marching troops into the forbidden Rhineland. And the Allied response? Well, they kind of just watched. They were really hoping it would all just blow over.
This all led to this disastrous policy we call appeasement. You see, the Allies were so haunted by the memory of World War I, they would do almost anything to avoid another war. And it led to this heartbreakingly predictable cycle. Hitler would demand some piece of land, the Allies would say, no way, then they'd cave and say, okay, fine, you can have it, but that's it. He'd promise, and then he'd immediately break that promise and take more. That's how we got Austria and then Czechoslovakia.
And this wasn't just happening in Europe. This aggression was global. Mussolini's Italy invaded Ethiopia, literally pitting modern tanks against spears. And at the same time, Japan cooked up an excuse to launch a brutal, full-scale invasion of China, where they committed just unspeakable atrocities.
All right, Hitler's next target was Poland, but he had a huge problem. If he invaded, he'd be fighting a two-front war against the Allies in the West and the giant Soviet Union in the East. So, in a move that made everyone's jaw hit the floor, the fascist dictator made a deal with his number one ideological enemy, the communist Joseph Stalin. They signed a secret pact to invade Poland together and just split it between them.
With his eastern border now secure thanks to that shocking deal with Stalin, Hitler was finally unleashed. The days of just letting him take what he wanted were over, and the whole world just held its breath. On September 1st, 1939, German forces poured across the Polish border. This was it. This was the line in the sand. Britain and France gave Germany an ultimatum, and when Germany ignored it, they declared war. World War II had officially begun. Now this was not going to be like World War I with its static trenches. Oh no. The Germans had a brand new, terrifying playbook, Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War. It was like this brutal, terrifyingly coordinated symphony of destruction. Tanks, dive bombers, infantry, all working together to punch a hole in the enemy line and cause a swift, total collapse.
And it worked with absolutely shocking speed. See, the Allies thought the Ardennes forest was basically impassable for tanks, so they barely defended it, while the Germans just drove their tanks right through it, completely surrounding the main Allied armies. They pushed the British back to the sea at Dunkirk, and then, just a few weeks later, they rolled into Paris. France, one of the great powers of Europe, had fallen.
Britain was now the last line of defense in Europe. But before Hitler could even think about invading, he had to control the skies. So the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, began a relentless campaign to wipe out Britain's Royal Air Force. And it was working. But then, after a tiny British raid on Berlin, an enraged Hitler made a huge, fateful error. He ordered the attacks to switch from airfields to the city of London. This gave the battered RAF just enough breathing room to regroup. And in the end, they won the Battle of Britain, saving the country from invasion.
So, unable to beat Britain, Hitler made his biggest and most fateful gamble yet. He completely betrayed his pact with Stalin and turned his entire war machine to the east. On June 22, 1941, he unleashed Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in all of human history. 3 million soldiers stormed into the Soviet Union, and Stalin was caught completely, totally by surprise.
Now, with Germany totally bogged down fighting in Russia, Japan saw its big chance. To achieve their dream of dominating Asia, they had to get rid of the one thing that could stop them, the United States Pacific Fleet. So on December 7, 1941, Japanese planes launched a devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The sleeping giant, as they called it, had been woken up. America was now in the war. For years, it really seemed like the Axis powers were unstoppable, carving out these massive empires. But with the industrial might of the United States and the sheer manpower of the Soviet Union now fully in the fight, the balance was about to shift, big time. A series of crucial battles all around the globe would finally turn the tide.
On the Eastern Front, the German advance finally ground to a halt right at the gates of Moscow, literally frozen by that infamous Russian winter. So Hitler diverted his forces south, toward a city named Stalingrad. What happened next was some of the most savage, brutal fighting in human history. The Soviets eventually launched a massive counterattack, encircling and completely annihilating the entire German Sixth Army. It was an absolute turning point, a catastrophic defeat from which Germany would never recover.
And the Allied victories just kept piling up. In North Africa, the British finally drove the Axis out of the continent at El Alamein. In the Pacific, the U.S. Navy delivered a hammer blow to the Japanese fleet at the Battle of Midway, sinking 4 of their most precious aircraft carriers. And then, on June 6, 1944, the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, opening that long-awaited Second Front in Western Europe.
So now you have the Soviets pushing from the east, the Allies pushing from the west, and American forces just relentlessly island-hopping across the Pacific. The Axis empires were crumbling, the walls were closing in from all sides, and the end was finally in sight.
After freeing France, the Allies drove right into Germany itself. Hitler threw everything he had left into one last desperate gamble, the Battle of the Bulge, but it failed. By 1945, the Allies were pouring in from the west, while the Soviets were closing in on Berlin from the east. With a Red Army fighting in the streets right above his head, Hitler took his own life. A few days later, Germany surrendered.
But even with Germany defeated, the war wasn't over. Japan fought on with this unbelievable ferocity. The U.S. was facing the horrifying prospect of a land invasion of Japan that could cost millions of lives. So, to avoid that, President Truman made the call to use a terrifying new weapon. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrendered, and World War II was finally over. So what was the result of all this? 6 long years of war, over 70 million people dead, an entire continent in ruins. The world was changed forever. The old European empires were done for, and 2 brand new superpowers rose from the ashes, the capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. And their wartime alliance? Yeah, that fell apart almost immediately, which raises the question you see here and sets the stage for a whole new kind of global conflict, the Cold War.